All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fourth installment of our Crisis Mode webinar series here at ECOS. My name is Landon Funston. I'm about 6 months into my role here as the Director of Strategic Partnerships. My primary role is to build and manage partnerships programs with our technology, supply chain, and professional services partners, of which Chris has obviously been a key part. I also work to explore new and shore up existing integrations opportunities for the software as we look to grow into the future. Today, we are thrilled to have Chris Farmond, founder and CEO of Small Batch Standard, leading this conversation. Chris will be diving into financial and operational strategies to not only survive this extended crisis, but also to come out on the other side with a leaner, more efficient, and ultimately more profitable business. Chris founded Small Batch Standards nearly a decade ago to serve the needs of the craft beer industry and has since become among the most reputable and recognized financial professionals in the industry. While he's technically a CPA by trade, Chris and his team have kind of broken the traditional mold of a client-accountant relationship. Our team's been working with Chris for years and have seen firsthand how his clients rely on him, not only for financial guidance, but also for in-depth business and strategic guidance. So if you have any questions during the course of this webinar, please enter them into the Q&A section of your Zoom screen, and we will get to them at the end. And with that, I will go ahead and hand it over to Chris.
Wow, Landon, best intro I've ever gotten in my whole life.
That's a low
joke. Thank you. That's awesome. Yeah, thank you for everyone for joining and attending today. I want to set the agenda before we get started. I plan to take you on a journey from where we are to where I think the industry is going. We will consider many situations which some of you may already be in at this moment. I also plan to discuss at a very high level financial benchmarks then and now. The stories, the benchmarks, insights I will share with you today are strictly my opinion based on the experience in working in the craft space. We have developed all of our metrics to date, and we've collected that information from customers over the years. So before we get started, I just want to reiterate what Landon said and drop any questions that you may have in the Q&A. And I'll be happy to answer them in the end. So let's get started. I want to begin by saying congratulations to everyone who is on this call for being open and operating. This has been 6 wild weeks. If I was a betting man, I would say the reason you are still open is because you operate your brewery with patience, care, and fiscal responsibility. No one could have imagined this situation in a million years, but here we are. At this moment, every organization is seeking a calm, empathetic leader, and I would imagine you fit that profile. The media continues to announce doom and gloom statistics, which I staunchly disagree with. The fear seems to be cooling off a bit, and I want to be the first to tell you, you're going to be okay. Well, you should be okay. The reason I say that is any business operating in a time of crisis, leading with care, patience, and fiscal responsibility will be okay. So the big question on everyone's mind is, when do we get back to normal? Well, that brings me up to another question. What exactly is normal? The past 6 weeks has tested every definition of the word normal. Do we want to label December 19 or January 2020 as normal? Are we fantasizing about getting back to those times? While December and January were nice, that's all we really knew at that time, so we called it normal. Here we are in April and May 2020, and we have some really messed up circumstances, which are not nice, but everything seems normal. And all this talk of normal leads me to another question. What does comparing normals get us to? Not very far the last time I checked. And more specifically, our customers are way beyond comparing normals. And here's what we're talking about. We're talking about getting comfortable with what we have. Speaking of comforts, let's analyze that for a second. What comforts do we currently have? So regarding quarantine, adults are consuming far more alcohol earlier than usual. Work commutes are down to nothing, which leaves more time to either work more or socialize with family. What about parents who are homeschooling? Speaking from direct experience, homeschooling 3 children, I know our consumption has gone way up. So back to comfortable. Is anything about this comfortable? No, it's not, but it is the new reality. What if we look at the comforts of your brewery as a business? You are a consumer goods manufacturer, which makes you essential. This places you near the top of the food chain when it comes to any forced closures. Add to that, you're producing alcohol. Put those two together, and I think you're in a great place. So you should be feeling very comfortable as a business. If we look at the losses of quarantine and the wins of owning a brewery, it sounds a lot like the wins and losses we experience in everyday life. So for the purpose of this presentation, I want to focus on the following. Because at the end of the day, we must accept whatever reality is placed in front of us and make the best of it. First, I'm going to bury normal as we know it. We are probably going to be forced to rethink most of our business except how to make delicious beer. Next, what happens at the reopen? How quickly will we ramp back up? Next, we need to consider the weird reality that our tap rooms may generate most of their revenue from beer to go for the foreseeable future. From there, I plan to share with you a few business models which I think will emerge out of all this. And finally, we will discuss my favorite topic, numbers. Metrics before and after. In this part, I will run you line by line through a couple examples of metrics which we preach about every day. And what the new baseline will be for craft breweries. I promise not to make your head spin with the numbers, but you may leave with a little bit of a headache. So let's get started. So I'm no doctor, but I can tell you that the public is pushing for a reopen of our economy. I predict that each state will reopen in the reverse manner that they shut down, meaning they will apply rules and restrictions on occupancy, gathering sizes, and distances. I know here in Florida, they just called for a 25% occupancy reopen on Monday for restaurants and retail. I think we'll see restrictions across the country like that to start. This will have a direct effect on the taproom's primary business because each state defines the taproom differently. Regardless of the definition, it is safe to say that there will be lasting cuts in foot traffic coming to the taproom looking to drink. I would not consider this a doom and gloom scenario just yet. The reason is you've been operating as a package store for the past 6 weeks. You have been delivering the same delicious, high quality liquid to your customers in a slightly different format. I am predicting there'll be more of this. Here's my challenge to you. How do you package not only the beer, but the whole taproom experience to be enjoyed at home? I know on Monday's session, Christine spoke about creative ways to do this. I urge you to keep the topic alive. We have established that drinking will remain constant. The only variable that is changing is the location. I am confident that gatherings will happen at home as they already are. We are social creatures who rely on socialization with other people. So how do we capitalize on this? Take the taproom experience home. So I've presented the challenge to you. Now what? If you're thinking about it, your beer is best when it is shared. When people gather to drink craft beer, they talk, they compare, and they recall other brewery experience or vacations. So do we want our new experience to end when the customer leaves with the case or crowler, or do we want it to end when the party is wrapping up at home? Breweries must rethink marketing, product packaging, pricing, ordering, delivery options in this new paradigm. A side tangent that I am talking about a lot is breweries must take online ordering more seriously. Most offer it now, but it is a Band-Aid solution. It is time to step up the infrastructure of your online ordering platform. And the last thing on the slide is the SBS PPP. I really hope the government hasn't trademarked PPP. The SBS PPP is referring to product pricing and profit of your packaging products to go. Wow, that's a tongue twister. I will address this in more detail as they go on, later on in the presentation. All right, so let's talk about 3 business models. Before the awful Rona appeared its head, production breweries really had 2 consistent streams of revenue, the taproom and distribution. All of the focus and planning fit into one of these 2 streams. With our new situation, we must carve out the package store as a 3rd stream of revenue. Yes, I understand taprooms have always sold package to go, but it was always presented as the dessert and not the main course. If we had to describe the 3 revenue streams, it would look like this. First, we envision the taproom to continue selling pints for consumption, but far lower quantity and frequency. Add to that, consumers will prefer to drink beer in an open space, say an outdoor beer garden or courtyard, which gives them the sense of security that gathering with people outdoors is safer than indoors. This concept of drinking outdoors will take time and confidence building. Next, distribution has seen a major dip. Draft will make a slow comeback, and I'm curious to what draft lines look like once restaurants open back up. Packages and distribution will remain strong. Breweries with their own canning lines have an advantage here. Mobile packaging is being worked hard, and the result is QA and QC is suffering. The last source of consistent revenue that we have been talking about is the package store model. We believe there are endless business opportunities and profit in this segment. Move to financial matters of the situation we're in, okay? As you know, all of our discussions around planning, decision-making, and talks with brewery owners always lead with numbers. This may be insensitive at the moment, but as you'll see in a minute, it really isn't. At the end of the day, you're running a business which requires fiscal responsibility. Successful businesses are run on tangible metrics versus gut decisions. To practice what we preach, we take it back to the numbers to guide us on this journey. I have identified 4 financial areas which are an important pulse check on your brewery. So over the next couple slides, we are going to review cash flow, labor metrics, general profit and loss metrics, and finally profit per SKU. Okay. The first financial matter worth discussing is cash flow. We really got ahead of this with a video that we released weeks ago, including a cash flow calculator that we built. Many breweries have already seen this and have found it very useful. The video has step-by-step instructions on how to model out 3 scenarios for your brewery and what will happen to cash in each scenario. The most important point with the cash flow is to understand how much you need for essential purchases. Essential purchases include your payroll, rent, raw materials, packaging, and yeast. These are all essential spends for the brewery. You cannot forego without them to keep operating. We refer to them as the Big 5, as they are your largest monthly spends. To get an idea of these costs and forecasts, to get an idea of these costs, forecast them out for the next 4 months. So what you would want to do is take a look at your P&L and identify an average, a 6-month monthly average of payroll, rent, raw materials, packaging, and yeast. Take an average of the last 6 months and then project that out for the next 4 months. Do you have enough cash coming in to support these? Will you need an infusion? Do you have access to debt? Our cash flow calculator and video discusses all these possibilities when it comes to managing cash flow. Other means of cash flow would be the payroll protection program, the government form of the PPP, not the SBS PPP. Now that you've been funded, what's next? Picture this for a minute. Documentation, more documentation, and yes, even more documentation. The PPP had 2 parts, and they were 2 very distinct parts for people that understood what was happening, right? The first part was funding. The second part is gathering all the documentation for the forgiveness. We have done a lot of work preparing our customers for the highest scrutiny from banks. The point of the PPP is and was to rehire or keep your employees on the payroll so they have no disruption due to the virus. Consult with your payroll company or your CPA on the best way to document the maximum forgivable amount. Next would be next items to support cash flow would be the EIDL, state and local loans, and grants. There are many programs available. Some are true loans and others are forgivable grants. And I've seen some that are a mix of both. All of these are meant to help you stay in business, and I recommend you look into options. Most of the loans out there today are at a reduced interest rate, which means cheaper cash. The available cash will serve 2 purposes. First, it will help you to continue paying for the big 5 expenses. And 2, it'll help you have cash available for any opportunities that may arise. Many breweries are waiting for an opportunity to expand, bring in more equipment, or purchase other brands. All of this takes available cash. Okay, now we're going to get into some deeper metrics with the labor and the P&L. Okay, for most breweries, the labor was the first adjustment made to the P&L. Part-time taproom staff was furloughed, salaried staff remained, and as a result, has taken on more responsibility and roles. For some brew pubs we work with, brewers are now helping taking payments from customers, GMs are handling expo of food, so everyone really has risen to the occasion to help where they can. While no owner wants to let people go or furlough staff, it's equally hard to continue paying people while they're not working. While the whole situation is not ideal, breweries have handled it in the best manner possible. I personally know owners of multi-generational businesses who are struggling to handle their labor force because I've never been through this before. For most of you, you're first-time business owners less than a decade old. So congratulations on how you've handled this unbelievable situation. All right, let's dive into some labor metrics for a minute. We're going to spend some time on this slide. So once again, all the metrics that we're going to talk about have been developed by our office and come from a sample of all the breweries we've worked with. During all engagements, we recommend your chart of accounts at a minimum have 4 labor accounts. I don't want to call them departments. They could be departments, but they're 4 chart of accounts. Production, sales, admin, and taproom. If you're running a pub or self-distribution, you're going to need a few more accounts, such as kitchen staff, back of the house, drivers. But at a minimum, you have these four chart of accounts. Okay. For this session, excuse me 1 second, admin. This way, when we're done running payroll, the importance of these 4 accounts is when we do our monthly accruals, we can easily track the metric of each account. I have decided to break down the metric into 3 categories: pre-shutdown, shutdown, and then post-shutdown. Please note that during the shutdown, you will experience a dip in revenue. All of our metrics here are a percentage of revenue, okay? Percentage of either total revenue for your fixed labor, such as production and admin, and Taproom will be a function of Taproom sales, and outside sales will be a function of sales labor will be a function of outside sales revenue. So note that during the shutdown, you will experience a dip in revenue, and we would so the percentages would decrease, the revenue percentages would decrease, therefore increasing the percent of labor expense in that category. So if we look at production first, you will see the fluctuation in the 3 columns. The production team should still be working, and if you had to reduce anyone, it would be the hourly production people. This may reduce it a little bit, but not that much, okay? And as you'll notice, we recommend a standard production labor of between 8 and 12% of total revenue. Due to the decrease in revenue, that's going to jump to 13 to 17%. And then post-COVID, or where we're going to be, it will slowly begin to shift back to 8 to 12% of total revenue. Next is your sales team. Your sales team should be on salary and should be shifted around to other jobs, right? Other tasks, whether it's administrative, packaging, or all around help. The reason is they can't visit as many accounts as normal, and they but they're on salary, and they need to continue contributing to the work. The moves for sales teams compensation should be directly attributable to commissions. So I view sales in Taproom as variable costs, and I view production and admin as fixed. Your sales team prior to pre-COVID should be between 10 and 15% of their sales. Most breweries start at 15%, and over time we try to get that down to 10%, and the average is usually 12%. So sales rep total compensation should be 12% of what they're selling. During that time, they're going to be selling less, which means a direct dip in sales is going to be direct, in sales labor. Same thing with Taproom. Taproom is going to be the same thing. On average, our customers in distribution are seeing a 40% decrease in wholesale sales. Once restaurants and bars on premise open back up, there should be an uptick in revenue, but it'll be slow. The independents fight for tap handles will be even harder once on premise opens back up. For the tap room, I'm suggesting that your the staff should only be reduced to your tap room manager and 1 to 3 part-time staff running the beer to go. And in most cases, admin are stepping in to run the beer to go. In our experience, tap rooms have maintained 60% of their pre-COVID revenue with less labor and overhead. In some cases, they've actually maintained 100% of their revenue through creative selling means of selling. Tap rooms should see a bump in business after reopening. It'll be a small bump, but the labor should also begin to normalize. Admin metrics will act similar to production as they're fixed. Due to the decrease in revenue, that percentage will increase during COVID, and once revenue increases, that percentage should come back down. Most of your admin folks are still employed, helping in areas they wouldn't used to, but still filling in. Let's look at an actual numbers example here. Okay. So our example here is a brewery doing pre-COVID revenue of $1 million, 70% distribution, 30% tap room. That would bring in distribution revenue at $700,000 and taproom revenue at 300,000. Okay. Some additional context. I took the averages from the previous percentages, from the percentages on the previous screen. While some of the numbers may look the same, it's important to understand that when we take production, for example, during COVID, and we apply it to the reduced revenue, that percentage will go up. Speaking of production, your production salary should stay the same, given you keep all of your main salary people on staff, and you will you continue that going. We do not expect to lay off much of the production team in the future as well, because the beer is going to continue to be sold, or to be made, excuse me. Next, we look at our sales. The wholesale business is 700,000, so we work with that number. Pre-COVID, I'm suggesting that your outside sales spend was 84,000. If you remember on the previous slide, we had pre-COVID outside sales of 10 to 12. And the reality for most breweries, as I mentioned, is around 15%. One of our first goals when we work with a brewery is always to get that number as close to 10% as possible. It takes time and strategy, but you can do it. For outside sales, the number, my examples, if your numbers are higher for outside sales, don't stress. It's normal, and you'll begin to see once on-premise comes back that those percentages will come down. So next number is going to be the tap room, and this may raise a stink, as it usually does. For a $300,000 tap room, your labor cost should be between $9,000 and $15,000 per year. What do I include in labor? Tipped minimum wage and your tap room manager salary. I can hear the gasps. I really can't, but I can. So a $300,000 tap room is generating $25,000 a month. I don't think you really need a manager at that point. The tap room is doing $25,000 a month. This can be a hybrid admin role, or ownership needs to step in. That's a very low volume tap room. So one more thing to consider is tips are not wages. They are passed through to your employees. If you're putting tips on the paycheck, then you'll get that as an expense, and the revenue should also be hitting to balance out my equation and get back to the metric. Admin, as we stated before, would be 3% of overall revenue. And yeah, okay. All right, so moving away from labor, we're going to talk about profit per SKU now. And this really is a side tangent from the labor metric and the P&L metric, but it's a very important one because I believe that everyone has some downtime right now, and it highlights a report in Ecos, which we use all the time. And what we do is we pull the finished goods cost per batch out of Ecos. It's under the production set of reports. And this report gets us a baseline of what raw materials and packaging cost per SKU should be. It basically gathers the recipes that you put in and the packaging costs that you put in and how you package that particular batch, and it factors in the WIP loss. It's really a great report baseline. To that report, we will always add a factor for labor, occupancy, brewery expense to get a total cost per SKU. Since you have some downtime right now, I would recommend, exploring this report, making sense of it. The least that you could do is pull it down into Excel and pull it down into Excel for a 6-month period, sort it by type, or beer type, and then sort it by SKU, package type, and then just review the similar beers and package types for any irregularities in price. The price should be within $1.50 of each batch, of each packaging amount. So this is something that we do, and there's a good story here that, and some of you have heard this in previous talks that I've given, but we relied on this report for a customer who was being harassed by distributors and accounts to move into a half barrel of their product. They do very high volume sixtils in packages. And we were able to take this report and really stress the numbers to see, well, if we moved into a half barrel, which we really don't want to because we can't get that price differential, what would that mean profit-wise? What would that mean profit-wise if one market busted and one market really flourished? If two markets flourished and three markets busted? So this is kind of like a side tangent to the metrics, but we love this report very, very much. Okay, cool. So the last piece that I'm going to talk about before we open it up to questions, and we have a few examples here, are our metric goals that we have created. And this is what we call our metric grid. It models out many scenarios for breweries. It's always wholesale, then taproom. For the example here, we have decided to highlight the 70-30 split. So staying in line with our previous example, 70% wholesale, 30% taproom. Okay, and uncovering the rest of the numbers would just have made it a big mess. But for this example, we're gonna focus on the 70-30. So we developed this grid so our customers can quickly reference their goal targets once we've completed the accounting for a certain period. It's a super simplified P&L, but we're able to mirror their P&L to match this close enough for quick outputs. I didn't want to confuse everyone with all the numbers, so we're just going to look at the 70-30. When we're benchmarking, we do everything on a percentage of revenue because it's easy to understand. Well, not really. Everything except outside sales compensation and goals. When speaking to that, we will do it based on case equivalence. So back to this grid or this example. This is based off revenue being 100%, and then the split of wholesale versus taproom. So next we look at our cost of goods sold section. You can see I've borrowed the ECOS language to track beer packaged and beer kegged and distribution. The bottom line here is that profit should show 68% of revenue, gross profit. Next, the next section is labor, which we've discussed in detail over the last couple slides. Then we move down below labor to advertising and rent, utilities, and general and administrative. I want to pause for a minute to discuss this area, especially advertising. So whenever we run an assessment or a financial assessment, a brewery assessment, we're always looking at COGS, labor, advertising, and occupancy. We believe those items drive the bottom line. Okay, to get to an EBITDA number though, we needed to include G&A. So my general metric for advertising should be between 3 and 5% of revenue. I've placed 5% on this column because this particular split is so reliant on wholesale. They have lower margins. So we need to be at the upper end of that range to remain top of mind for customers. A brewery with a 10-90 split, so 10% wholesale, 90% taproom, would be fine spending 3% on advertising, but not the situation we're talking about. So a question I always get is, what are you including in advertising? And my answer is anything customer facing. So anything print, anything point of sale, point of distribution, anything social, tastings, beers for events and festivals. It really is, how is the customer going to interact with the brand? So if we go down to the bottom, we will look at the EBITDA, and I have EBITDA at 5% for this brewery, bringing in $1 million with this revenue split. That means for every $1 million they bring in, they should be having an earnings of $50,000 a year. When we back out interest, we're left with a net cash of 3%. So net cash was a term. Net cash in is a term that was just defined by me. It won't show up in any finance books or accounting books, but I created it because it just makes sense to me. Okay, so here we go. So on this slide, I'm showing some tweaks made to the brewery doing $1 million, 70-30. And the point here is, we've already gone through the first line, and the point here is, I'm really stressing to breweries that a break-even model is acceptable during the COVID. Most breweries are running above break-even, but it is okay to be running break-even. So if we look at it line by line, I've kept COGS the same. COGS is booked at the time of the sale, so cost to make beer should not go up. I lined up the labor cost to reflect what we've discussed in the labor slides. Advertising, I've increased to 7%. I think at a time like this, there's never enough communication to keep your brand top of mind. I consider fixed costs, I consider occupancy a fixed cost. So with the decrease in revenue, there will be an automatic increase to the occupancy of fixed, which is a fixed cost. I have general and administrative decreased due to everyone being spend cautious. So if you look down at the bottom line, as mentioned on the previous slide, 3% should be going to the bottom line. During COVID and matching our cash flow model, which I talked about earlier, I'm expecting, a net cash to be right at break even or slightly negative. Once restrictions are lifted and new selling models come into play, things should stabilize back to normal. Okay. So this is the final slide that I have. And to conclude, I want to leave you with some next steps. I love next steps. As mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, now is the time to be operating your business with care, patience, and fiscal responsibility. I hope we provided you with some tools to help with the fiscal responsibility part. For us, it has always been about the numbers, and the numbers are scary sometimes. Our goal is to deliver numbers in the least scary way possible and to make decisions based on those numbers. In addition, there's a lot of noise out there predicting some really dark stuff that's going to happen in the brewing industry. I'm not seeing it, and I have been looking a lot. I got a call from a customer yesterday in a very large market, and she has been tasked by her local guild to reach out to a senator or somebody to talk about the effect on the craft industry. And she says, Chris, what are you seeing out there? Because everyone in our market continues to remain open. And I was like, me too. I'm not really telling them, I'm not really seeing this doom and gloom that we're hearing from our media leaders. So her question is, what do I tell them? And I was stumped. I was stumped. Yes, for once I was stumped. So long story short, let's try to drain a lot of this noise as possible and just run our businesses, accept the new reality. Last suggestion is, please join our conversation by joining our email list. We're talking about the stuff in this presentation every single day. Well, not really every day, but at least weekly. So now I will open it up to questions if you have any, Landon.
Yeah, Chris, thanks for the great presentation. Obviously, there's a lot of valuable information there, and I did see a couple questions come through just to our chat. This presentation and video will be available on our YouTube channel, hopefully later this afternoon. So be sure to check there if you'd like to reference this or share it with additional members of your team. As for specific questions, one of our attendees asks, on the labor metric you showed during COVID and post-COVID, is post-COVID when we are back to 100% occupancy, or during the intermediate social distancing restrictions?
I think that I don't think it's as black and white as that. What I think is needs to be taken into consideration is just falling within the following the revenue, right? Following the dollar. If the dollar ramps up at 30% a quarter, you're going to need to backfill some of that labor in. Okay. If the dollar ramps up at 100% during the first quarter when restrictions are lifted, then you're going to need to backfill that. We would need to look at it on a case-by-case basis, but at this point, I think every brewery has enough salaried people available to step in and help in positions that they don't typically help in. So it's a matter of ramp up, revenue ramp up and what that looks like.
Okay. Got a few more questions coming in now. What are you recommending for PPP documentation to maximize the loan forgiveness?
Yeah, good question. So we put together a list of items, and we put together a spreadsheet calculator. But the bottom line is you need to focus in on the 8 weeks after funding. And the banks are going through round 2 of funding now. I think once this hits, once that's done, they're going to begin putting out guidance. So start with your banker and say, hey, what do you guys want? In the meantime, start gathering payroll reports and retirement reports, health insurance, all the items that go into that are forgivable. Rent, utilities, I would possibly go as far as writing physical checks and taking images of those checks, making copies of them. But there's never enough documentation because my gut tells me that the SBA is now putting together what they need. They're going to give it to the banks, and then it's going to be the bank's interpretation of what they need. So I would just have as much paper trail as possible.
All right, next question. Well, I guess it's more of a comment than a question, but I'll frame it as a question. So, member of our audience says one item that we need to hit the legislators with is for those states like Virginia who could not home deliver pre-COVID directly from the brewery, we need to keep that option going. Chris, have your breweries been in contact with any legislatures, or how would you recommend that businesses kind of coalesce around that and influence local policy?
Mm-hmm. This is a little bit out of my comfort zone, but I don't think that we can do home delivery in Florida. I could be wrong though. I think it's only packaged to go. But I know the states and the districts that are allowed to do home delivery have really hit it hard, and they're doing very, very well. They're doing well for 2 reasons. Number one, we're an Uber Eats economy, and then number 2, the ticket orders are larger. It's easier when you're on your phone. It's the Amazon theory. You just kind of click on ordering more. So yes, if you have that possibility, I would continue. I would push for home delivery, but as far as lobbying and legislation, it's really out of my comfort zone. But that's a great point to bring up, that breweries should be banding together and requiring some of these lax rules to remain.
Chris, can you please expand on examples of how some breweries have been, quote, taking the taproom experience home?
Sure. As I mentioned on that slide, it's about it's about envision what happens in your brewery when people are drinking in the tap room. How can you create that at the house? I'm not sure if are they reading something? Are they staring at their phones? Are they conversing with people? Can you send them home with literature? Can you send them home with a newsletter? Can you send them home with a newspaper? Can you send them home with a game or talking points? Because at the end of the day, a majority of the people are going to be sharing that beer. I also think packaging is important. So if we want to take a case from or a lesson from Apple, everyone gets really giddy when they open something from Apple. I'm not suggesting people go that far, but it's going to be this sort of attention to detail, which get people coming back. There is a brewery that does peanuts, shelled peanuts, and throw them on the floor. They include a bag of peanuts with every package to go, and that really resonates with the customers. They're doing extremely well with package to go. So what is it about your tasting room that people enjoy and want to do, and try to bring that back to the house? I've seen a couple examples with breweries running trivia over Zoom, which is kind of cool. I've seen one where they're doing a DJ, like a DJ happy hour, where they're playing music. There's been some really creative stuff out there.
Yeah, I'll actually throw one more on top of that. For those of you that tuned into our webinar on Tuesday, John Kelly of Craft Peak shared an example of a brewery in the UK called Duration Beer, and they pre-sold tickets to a virtual tour of the brewery so that everyone could participate live. It wasn't necessarily something you downloaded, but at the designated time, let's say 5 o'clock on Thursday, everyone who bought a ticket tunes into a Zoom call and gets walked through the brewery. They also got 4 to 6 beers delivered to their doorstep in preparation for the virtual tour. And then at the end, they walked them through a live tasting and kind of tutored them on the brewing process and what went into the specific beers. So I thought that was one of the more creative ideas that I've seen. And apparently it's one that got a lot of momentum for them. So kind of tacking on to what Chris said, whatever makes you unique, just try and fail. But don't be afraid to push the limits of innovations and do things that you may not have even seen from others.
Yep.
Jump into the next question, or Chris, you have something to add there?
No, I agree with you. That's what it's all about.
Where was Taproom Transfers in your grid?
Good question. Very good question. So we included, and I'm probably going to go back and update that, but we included Taproom Transfers in G&A. When we look at the source of Taproom Transfers, it's a small amount. And that particular brewery was so invested in wholesale that it would be buried in general and administrative, but it really does belong under COGS, and I will go update that.
Okay. Next question, asking you to get out your crystal ball. What is your biggest concern for the brewing industry over the next 6 months?
So I think the industry has pivoted extremely well as it comes to retail, taproom, and I think they're going to continue to evolve. There's going to be many creative sales measures. My biggest fear is distribution and what happens when on-premise opens, and how do they allocate tap lines, right? How do they allocate draft lines? There are a lot bigger companies out there that have gone without selling a lot of draft for 6 weeks now that they're not used to. So what does that do to the constraint of independent taps? When I go into a restaurant or I go into a bar and I look at the tap line, my brain immediately goes to, all right, well, who put this in, or who helped support this tap line? And I'll look at the brands and it'll tell me very quickly. And then I'll just run through some quick math on how many they have and how many independents. And I start thinking about the distributors in the area and who gets, so the top line speaks to me. And I'm just afraid that that entire top line is going to be taken by them now, for until they can get back some of their losses and gains. So that's my biggest concern. I think tap rooms are going to do well. I think package is fine. I would say for breweries that have canning lines and packaging, this is the time to make sure that puppy is roaring and purring and working, because there's going to be opportunity for you to package a lot of your own product and other people's product, just given where I think draft's going to go. So that's my biggest thing. But big picture, you're making alcohol. People drink alcohol. It's part of their day. It's a must-have. It's not a luxury.
All right, last call here. I've got one more question. If anybody else has anything else they'd like Chris to address on this call, feel free to drop it in the Q&A. Otherwise, should we rehire our team if we do not have enough work?
Good question. I assume this is around the PPP money. It really, I get this question a lot. It depends on, first of all, revenue increase. And then second of all, do you have work or projects for them? The work or projects suggestion always comes back with, sure, we have 1 million products, but that just takes more money. And we don't have that. We don't have money to allocate to those projects now. So the answer is I would definitely have a ramp up plan back into place to bring back your hourly must-have people that you let go. So that may be some hourly production people. That may be inside sales support. That may be your lead taproom hourly people. It may not happen all up front, but understanding with the PPP, you have 8 weeks to spend that money, basically 4 payrolls, if you're paying every other week. So it's, once again, that's not a black or white. It's a situation by situation, but put a plan in that if revenue increases here, then we use it. And also looking at what's the next best alternative for that cash, right? So we know it's a 1% loan over 2 years, no payments for 6 months. Depending on what's not forgiven, after the 6 months, those payments may be steep. It may be $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 a month to get it paid back, or you could just hand it all back to them versus saying, hey, we need a plan to pay some of these people, get them in here doing something, cleaning. So this PPP has a lot more consequences in planning than most people think about. Way past just the forgiveness part, really about the best use of funds. So I hope I didn't confuse you more on that. I hope it helps you, but that's really my take on whether you should rehire everybody or not.
That's great, Chris. Thanks for your insight. I hope everyone found this session to be valuable. Again, you can find a recording of this on our Ecos YouTube channel later on this afternoon. We have our final session tomorrow, which will be at 11 a.m. and focused on the future of the brewing industry. This will actually be a roundtable. So we'll be joined by Ratio Beer Works, Society Brewing, Weldworks Brewing, and Wormtown Brewing. So please join us at 11 a.m. for that. In the meantime, if you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to our team or Chris's team. You can find contact information for Chris on his website. Chris, I don't know if you want to share your email here. Of course, you're welcome to reach out to me at landon@goecos.com as well.
Yes, fine. It's just chris@sbstandard.com.
Okay. Everyone, thanks so much. Have a great rest of the week, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.